Back home, and how much will this week's rate cut affect the upcoming election campaign? We will talk about that, plus plenty more. Joining me live is Special Counsel at Fitzpatrick & Co Advisory and Hawker Britton co-founder Bruce Hawker. Bruce, we will talk about interest rates first up, but I want to get your perspective. You've been in and around government for a long time, half a century. What's happening with the ships in the Tasman Sea? The government seem very relaxed about it, both Anthony Albanese and Richard Marles.
Well, look, you have to look at this with some perspective. The Australian Navy was involved in manoeuvres with the US Navy and the New Zealand Navy just this month in the South China Sea, about the 5th and 6th of February. So I think you've got to look at everything that happens in the context of our position around this and the fact that we spend a lot of time up in their part of the world. And I don't think it's any real surprise that they would do a manoeuvre which really is in international waters between New Zealand and Australia, because we were both up there in their part of the world.
So it's a bit of tit for tat.
That's how I see it. And I think that's essentially how people see it at that international high-level diplomatic sphere. It's something which will happen from time to time. They go through the manoeuvres literally, politically and literally, and it all plays out and we go on to the next stage. It's a bit Cold War-ish. You used to see this a lot in the 60s and 70s.
The overriding concern from the government seems that they weren't told early enough about what's happened, and Penny Wong apparently has passed that message on.
Yeah, and that's a very legitimate concern because we saw that it impacted flights over the Tasman. Ordinarily, they would give 12 to 24 hours notice of something like this if they were going to use live fire. That did not happen in this case. So Australia's got good reason to be very unhappy about that.
Now, let's head overseas to the Trump-Zelensky clash. What do you make of it all? We're living in a very different world, aren't we?
Yeah, well, you've got to see the world through very different lenses these days when you're looking at American foreign policy. It just basically comes down to what Donald Trump wants for himself and for America. And he doesn't give a damn about other countries. It's all about the United States. This is classic American unilateralism, or isolationism, you might want to call it as well, where everything has to be looked at through how it affects America. That he's not interested in playing the policeman role that the Americans have played since the Second World War.
And Peter McGorrin made a good point this morning, saying that the Zelensky-Trump thing is personal and it goes back.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to Hunter Biden and perceptions that they were looking after Biden Jr. In the lead up to the election. And we know that for Trump, so much of what he does is conducted at a very personal level.
Now, how does this play out here? Because we've seen some heavy criticism from an Australian perspective, from Tony Abbott, from Peter Dutton, from others.
Yeah, now I think this is really interesting, Tim, because in the months leading up to where we are now, we've really seen Dutton adopting a sort of a bit of a Trump-light sort of persona. He's made comments which have been largely positive about Trump. He's certainly been out saying things that would appeal to people who were sort of a bit Trumpy in their outlook, his attitude towards flying the Australian flag and so forth. Flying the Aboriginal flag. So I think what we're seeing now, though, is some counsel from people inside the Liberal Party that he has to wind it back in. It doesn't really play well with the broader Australian electorate to sound too much like he's a Trump man, because there's too much instability and uncertainty as far as Australia is concerned, coming out of Trump's America right now.
It's been, look, from a Peter Dutton perspective, it's been interesting to watch, and you would never want to underestimate him. He's really grown as a retail politician. He has grown over these past
And he has to nuance his messages now because he has to appeal to a broader section of the electorate. He needs to try to get those people in out of suburban areas who are feeling the pinch from interest rates and who might be a bit more inclined to, a simplistic sort of Trump-like solutions. But he also has to talk to people in the middle ground who are much more worried about Australia being the Australians' leader sounding a bit like Donald Trump.
Yeah, so you need to be all things to all people if you're going to be Prime Minister. Well, on that interest rate situation. We saw the cut during the week. How will that play out, and how much do you think that'll help the sitting government?
Well, I think it will assist them. It certainly plays to their narrative that they've done the hard yards over the term of their government to bring down interest rates, to keep downward pressure on inflation, which they have done to their credit, and at the same time keeping unemployment low. That's a good story to tell to the electorate that is feeling the pinch now to say, well, look, don't change horses in midstream. We're the ones who have got us through this difficult period. The future's looking pretty positive. Let's stick with what you've got.
Certainly what they're going to run with.
Sure is.
Thanks, Bruce. Appreciate that. We'll do it again next week.
Please.